to mention if that we planned on recording this session, so just a little background noise, but we plan on recording this session. So if anybody has any issue with that, just let us know, and we could reconsider that. But welcome everybody to our second virtual Power BI user group. So for those of you who have not attended our Glastonbury sessions, just a quick introduction to Talon. Talon is located in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where we typically hold our Power BI user groups. But obviously with our current situation, we've been holding these virtually on Teams, and have been realizing some success in these because not only are we limited to the individuals part of the user group within the state of Connecticut, but we've been getting some people outside the state as well. So happy to have everyone here, and of course we look forward to getting back into the Glastonbury office, but again, excited to see some new faces and talk with everybody. So just as a brief agenda of what we'll be going over today, typically we sometimes start off with a Power BI overview. We'll kind of gauge if this is necessary, during our introductions on the call, but we'll probably breeze over that fairly quickly. Then we'll go into some introductions, just describe the PUG as an organization for our new members. We'll just describe what we're all about. And for our feature presentation, there's been a lot of activity in the Power BI world as of late. We always talk about every user group, how there's a bunch of updates just month by month, but we really feel that there's a lot of backing behind Power BI from Microsoft, but also as an adoption rate, across organizations. So we wanted to kind of take a step back for this user group and not, dive deep into a single feature like we usually do. But the goal of this group or this meeting today is to go over a bunch of highlights that we've been seeing around the product. So we have a whole bunch of different presenters today. We each have kind of 10 to 15-minute presentations. So we'll be swapping screen shares quite a bit. So we'll see if this pro for the virtual sessions, the ability to manage all these presenters. But we'll go through some feature highlights, and then we'll go over our normal monthly new feature summary as well. So with that being said, how many people we have on the call? We like doing some introductions, and I say we do go around the room, just giving some intros. I'll start. My name's Casey Philcox. I'm a lead consultant with Talon. My recent BI challenge or observed BI trend, recently I've been a part of some proof of concepts of some load testing capabilities of Power BI. So just gathering up those tools and kind of digesting the Power BI performance app that they have available for premium capacities, and consuming that content has been a challenge for me. What do I want to get out of this user group? Just expanding my knowledge on the product. I find this user group great to listen to other people using the product, see their problems, and learning from them. So with that being said, maybe we start off with our new members. Noah, I'll put you on the spot, but you want to give your intro?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Casey. So my name is Noah Kale. I'm a little bit newer to Talon, but I'm the business development manager for the Connecticut region. Basically helping manage our relationship with our customers and making sure they always get in contact with the right resources over here at Talon. So for whatever reason you have any questions or anything like that after the meeting and don't know exactly who to reach out to, feel free to reach out to me. And then recent BI challenge, I would say just getting started here. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about Power BI. So similar to Casey, just going to try and learn as much as I can from this group meeting and the future ones to what I'm going to get out of this user group.
All right. And yeah, no, not to put you on the spot, but our new members usually have their presentations ready to go. Do you have your presentation?
Man, I don't think I am fully prepared.
No, I'm just kidding with you. We wanted to pull a prank on our very own Pug resident. So we wanted you to go first. So thanks for joining and being a good support.
Definitely.
You probably know whose idea that is. Can you guess?
I was gonna say it seemed like Sam was very happy about it.
I'm the world's worst poker face.
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm not the best at pulling off pranks either, so I hope that went okay. All right, back to our schedule. I don't know. Do we have any volunteers want to give a brief intro? Go around the room.
I could start. Jared Brown. I've met quite a few of you, I think, at past pugs. But I'm the VP of Data and Analytics here at Talon. It's funny, we had a conversation the other day with a customer, and they asked how long we were doing it. And Power BI officially is 5 years old, but we've been doing it for 6, 7, something like that, because it actually existed before as part of Excel. So just a fun fact. And as far as recent trend, one thing we've been seeing a lot lately is kind of a real focus on the user experience and making like incredibly stunning, usable, intuitive reports, which has kind of been great to kind of get immersed in projects where that's a focus as well. So. And what I hope to get out of this user group, just kind of sharing knowledge, understanding challenges that are out there, and hopefully solving some problems too.
Oh yeah, I'll go next. Michael DeGrucci, and I'm a data architect. Currently working on an application to take a spreadsheet-based defense piece and move it up onto a database and Android phones. I've had iPhones to follow. I'm sort of looking at this as what are the capabilities of Power BI in that scenario or in some other scenarios that I support with some other stuff. So if anybody's got thoughts on that, I'll be interested to know. That's it.
All right. I'll go next. James Airy. I'm a senior BI consultant for Talon. I've been working with Power BI a lot. Not so much a challenge I've had recently, but something cool I've been doing is using Power On, which is a sort of an add-on to Power BI that allows you to do write-backs from Power BI. So that's just been a lot of fun. And getting out of this user group, want to just sort of relax for a little while. That's what I want here.
I'll go next. I'm Brian Barbera. I work for Eversource, and I'm the manager of predictive analytics and data analytics. Recent Power BI challenge or BI challenge would be to have people use less filters and use the visuals more. And what do I want to get out of this group? Basically to learn more about Power BI, how people are using it, and how they're implementing it across various industries.
I can go next. My name is Killian Green. I'm a consultant here at Talon. Recent challenge would just be getting up to speed and learning Power BI, though this group certainly makes that easier. And then, like I said, what I want to get out of this group is just to learn as much as I can and meet the community.
I can go. My name is Samantha Francis. I work for Talon as well. I'm the marketing manager. I don't particularly have a recent BI challenge, but I guess or Power BI challenge, if I did, I would have to say something similar to what Brian just said. I think my standpoint is more to kind of find out how people are using it and what they like or have challenges with it, so I can consider how best to market the product and our services to help people, because I'm not technical and I think it is super cool and user friendly. So what I want to get out of this group is I have been here from the beginning kind of, so I love seeing it grow. We get more people at each meeting every time, so it's really exciting.
Anybody else? All right. So we continue. If anybody has any questions, this is meant to be an interactive group. So if during any of our presentations, if you have a question, feel free to interject, and we're excited to show you the content. But most importantly, we want everybody to be engaged and ask the questions that you have. So just some really quick user group business. Our meeting frequency is every other month. As mentioned, we've been doing these virtually recently, so we haven't really lost our stride. For leadership roles within the group, we've been looking for a VP of programming. Just to give a little bit of more detail on this role, this person would be have a responsibility of kind of putting some presentations together, and that doesn't mean that necessarily they're creating the presentations, but just kind of organizing the curation of the presentations. So anybody that has any interest, or I'll put as an aside, if you have an interest in presenting, definitely just let us know. It's kind of a good segue into our other volunteer roles. If you have any presentation, if you have a business problem and want to email the group or even myself personally separately, feel free to do so, and it could potentially be a topic of our next user group. And then sponsorships. If any of you are part of an organization that would like to sponsor one of these groups, you can just let us know, and you can create the presentation, have people within your organization to curate some of the content, and be happy to present in front of a group. It would be fantastic. So just a few different mechanisms of staying in touch with the group. As mentioned, we check these group forums quite a bit to answer any questions, just get some news on the events as a whole. So the meetup is what is distributed to alert you of our next meeting. But ultimately, if you're signed up on the Power BI user group site, it provides you not only a gateway to this user group, but a whole bunch of other user groups around the globe, actually, to see questions, to see topics, and propose some discussions as well. All right, with that being said, we'll jump into some feature highlights that a bunch of people within the group wanted to present. So I'm going to start off, and as I mentioned, we have a variety of presenters today, so we'll do our best to keep the screen sharing, swapping to a minimum, but just to give you some forewarning, we're going to be swapping around to a bunch of different presenters. All right, so the first feature was one that I am very excited about and happy to demo. And this is the introduction of deployment pipelines within Power BI. So currently, this is a preview feature and only available if you have premium capacity. But what these deployment pipelines allow us to do is finally have some sort of management between these pillars of development, test, and production. The deployment pipeline is a reusable tool that is going to enable business intelligence creators, of course, with premium capacity, to manage the life cycle and their organizational content within Power BI. So before this, it was kind of just the standards that your organization put in place. But it's really great to see the Power BI team actually building something within Power BI to begin deploying throughout a development, test, and production environment. So why use deployment pipelines? Pretty obvious bullet points here if you're familiar with any sort of project development. But improve productivity, the ability to have designated areas where designated people within teams can delegate responsibilities. Kind of hand in hand with that, the faster delivery of content updates. You have dependable. I'm calling them pillars of development, test, and production. But you have these areas that the content that you're looking at, and what it takes to get your content moved from one pillar to the next. And then you reduce the manual work and errors. As mentioned before, these deployment pipelines, what I've most often seen around the Power BI community is people creating multiple workspaces, which is kind of what deployment pipelines do. But now this provides you, the organizational tool to actually put this plan in motion. So we'll actually be going through a small demo of these 4 steps you see below, where we'll create a pipeline, we'll assign a workspace, we'll show some example development and testing of content, and then ultimately the goal is to share this content with end users. So the deployment pipelines are still very new. I forget the month they came out, but it was definitely this year and within the past 2 months, I believe. So If you have premium, you may have seen this option show up in the service already. It's in the left-hand pane of the Power BI service. We'll take a look. But here are some early best practices that I've identified in order to put these pipelines into motion. So I put these best practices for each environment. And for the development environment, I'm actually, sorry, going to start with the last bullet point. But the thing that I see making the development environment the biggest success is true separation of your modeling development with your report development. So what that means is if you've ever published a Power BI report to the service, not only do you publish the report, but you publish the data set that drives that report as well. So when you push that up, you actually see two artifacts within the Power BI service. You see the data set and the report. In order to, I think, have these deployment pipelines succeed, I definitely recommend separating the two. So what that means is you'll build your Power BI model within Power BI Desktop. You'll publish that up as strictly just the data set. And then from there, when you start building reports, you will leverage a live connection. So when you use that get data functionality, you'll connect to the Power BI data set and build your reports off of that. Another item within this development pillar is all reports should be developed within Power BI Desktop and edited within Power BI Desktop. So what I mean by this is, as we'll see, these deployment pipelines in development, they're essentially just workspaces. So if you have access to that workspace, you can go in there and change content within the service. Now, if you're trying to organize the life cycle of these reports and data, it makes it very hard to maintain, ad hoc reports and the creation of or minimal changes within the workspace. So creating these reports in Power BI Desktop, I think, is the best practice to ensure that you have full control over the reports. And then finally, the use of parameters in your model. So as we'll see in our demo, you have the ability to, within each of these environments, leverage parameters to change the data source of your data. So these parameters will show up within the deployment pipeline. And if you point these parameters at your dev database, your test database, or your production database, within the deployment pipeline, you could actually point to those parameters and ensure that your reports are pointing to the proper data source. So moving on to our test best practices, pretty straightforward here. Your test environment should simulate your production environment. And personally, I think this means in terms of compute power as well, because this is also where you're going to measure performance. So maybe it doesn't have to, from a premium capacity standpoint, you may hear the SKUs involved in that, the P1s, the P2s, the P3s. They all have different compute power behind them. So the test environment should ideally match that when you're testing the performance, because this is your go-to area for your reviewers, your QA to actually go into this workspace, look at the reports, and then measure the performance as well. So you can actually run your performance metrics against this environment and eventually push that to production. And then finally, the best practices for this production pillar is to ensure that you manage who can deploy to production. Kind of a standard practice around any sort of project development. You should have a specific group of people that are eligible to push your content to production. So this is going to be managed through the workspace. We're going to talk a little bit more about the access to both the workspace and the deployment pipeline. They're managed separately. But the takeaway here is if you are an admin or a member of the workspace, you can publish to production. So with that being said, I'm going to open up Power BI Service and get our first look at the deployment pipelines. I guess before I jump into the demo, any immediate questions from just those slides? I think it would help to see this in action as well. So, all right. So here I am in the Power BI service, app.powerbi.com. And here you can see we have a brand new tab called Deployment Pipelines. I already created my first pipeline. We're going to take a look at this, and we'll also create a new one. But here is where all of your pipelines will exist. So clicking into my first pipeline, you get some pretty standard information. You get a title and a description. And then here are those three pillars of development, test, and production. So just looking at the UI here, these cards contain some high-level information about what is contained within this deployment pipeline or this workspace. And I could click Show More, and I could see exactly the content that is contained within this workspace. So Pipeline Workspace has 3 data sets and 3 reports, and you can see some high-level numbers up there. In my test environment, I have 2 data sets and 2 reports, and in my production, I have 2 data sets and 2 reports. So the idea here is that you would push your content from development to test to production following those best practices. And these are all backed by workspaces. So if I go to my workspaces, you'll see that I have 3 workspaces, all within premium capacity. I have Pipeline Workspace. This represents my dev. I then have one that is appended with test, and I have one that's appended with production. This is out of the box functionality by Microsoft, and I find it a little silly. Like, why wouldn't you want your workspace with nothing attached to it to be your production? I believe Microsoft, as this is a new feature, they're expecting you to move some legacy workspaces into these deployment pipelines. So that's the reasoning behind the workspace names. However, as mentioned in the best practices, ideally, you'll see at the very end in our production pillar, the final step here is to update the application. So each workspace should be backed by a Power BI app. And once you deploy to this workspace, you should update the app that you can name whatever you'd like. So I believe that's the
Casey,
intention of Microsoft.
Yeah, Casey, you're saying you're not able to edit those workspace names at all right now?
Well, you actually, I don't know for sure. You may be able to. We'll give it a shot.
Don't break it on my account.
Yeah, let's try that at the end. You may be able to name it, but as you create these from the empty pillars, they call it an empty stage. It will create these names for you. I actually have not tried renaming them. Let's do that at the end. All right. So now let's look at how these different parts of the pipeline are managed. So from a high level, you can see with the icons within the middle of the pillars, if they are synced or not. So here I have dev and test. I mean, straight away, you could see I have 3 data sets, 3 reports, 2 data sets, 2 reports. There is a difference between the two. By clicking on the compare, you actually have some icons. There are 3 separate types of icons. There's a difference, an add, and a delete. And you could quickly see some high levels. We have 1 difference, 2 additions, and then within the content itself, you have what they correspond to. So what you can do is you can take these and deploy to test, or you could actually deploy explicitly select the ones you want to deploy. So I'm just going to deploy everything. And what this is going to do is it's going to push all of these metadata changes to my next environment. So I'm going to click deploy to test. And once this is finished, I should be able to see that the green icon that these are synced up. And if I navigate to that workspace, I should also see that report and data set that I added to that workspace. Shouldn't take too long. But while this is going, I will mention how it actually identifies the differences. So it is strictly based on metadata. So the first thing I thought when I was playing with these was how does it handle model changes? So basically, if you do something like add a table or add a column, you won't have to refresh your data. It'll simply just push the data over, and the refresh that it will do within the deployment will refresh with just the changes that have been made. But if you have some column header change or some name change, you will have to refresh your data set. But in terms of a different visual or a new dashboard, it's all based on the metadata of the Power BI artifact. So simply just by changing a visual, it will recognize that as a difference. All right, took a longer than I expected, but what you should now see is we have this green icon indicating that the two are synced. And I could go to the workspace as well. It'll open up a new tab in which I can see the data set and report I was referring to. So now I have 3 reports and 3 data sets. I click on this view in pipeline. When a workspace is connected to a pipeline, you have this button available to you, and you could go right back to the pipeline. So I'm going to click deploy to production. You'll see that we have a change. So let's say that I went through all the reports. I verified with my QA team that everything looks to be A-OK. I'll deploy this to production. It says 1 item in the destination workspace will be affected during the deployment. 1 item will be replaced. That's fine. I'm expecting new content there. So in terms of what this will accomplish, it's pretty much doing the same thing we did from dev to test. But of course, with production, there's one last step that is the best practice to take, and that is to update the associated app. With these deployment pipelines, the associated next step that you should take is publishing an application. For those of you unfamiliar with the Power BI app, they're kind of the holy grail of your Power BI content. You have resources most likely within your organization that don't want to learn the Power BI service. They don't want to go through workspaces. They're not really part of the team that's doing the ad hoc report creation. They're your, maybe directors or CEO that just need the data, the reports. And the content that is for them are Power BI apps. And all Power BI app is just a curated set of Power BI content. It just wraps up a workspace and then distributes that content to end users. So we'll take a look at what that looks like in a bit as soon as this finishes. Apologize for the time on this. When I was playing with this earlier, it would only take a little bit. All right, great. So now you can see my pipeline is completely synced. Now at this point, you'll see that there's obviously no more stages or environments higher than production. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click Update App. So an app has a place where you can name it. So I could rename this something new. I could say My Final Reports. This is a production app. If you've ever used an app, once again, you could modify the navigation. So, I have 3 different reports in here. If I want to reorder them, I can do that. If I want to add maybe READMEs or links to supporting documentation, things of that nature, you can do that. You go into permissions and share it with the appropriate people within your organization. And because I'm in a premium capacity, I could actually share this with external users as well. But I'm going to click Update App. And this will wrap all of my production content into a distributed piece of Power BI reports that I can send to the appropriate people. So here is that app with all of my production content that has now went through a deployment pipeline, dev, test to production. I have a few more things to show with the deployment pipelines, just the creation of a new one. But are there any questions as I set that up?
Yeah, Casey, I think we had a couple of questions in the chat. I can just read those off to you if you want.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'll bring it up too. Sorry.
Yeah. First one is there a rollback feature?
Yes. So within production, I haven't done this yet, but I believe where is it? So what you can do, I'm trying to find.
Is that an ellipse next to the?
Oh, deploy to previous stage. So in order to activate this, it needs to be what they refer to as an empty stage. So you would have to remove this aspect of the deployment pipeline, and then this will become enabled to deploy to the previous stage. So this rollback does exist, but you do need to modify the deployment pipeline. And this is a preview feature, so I do, potentially see this changing, but this needs to be an empty stage, which I can see.
But that would mean that you wouldn't be able to roll back once you hit production. Then you no longer have like the source of truth area. Like once you deploy to production, you can't roll back what was done to production. Similarly, if like there was stuff in test that wasn't in production yet and was different from development for some reason, you couldn't roll back to its old state. Okay.
Yeah, I do not see a way for that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is nice though that you can take production back through the steps if you realize there was a critical mistake. The other question we have in here is, can we use one data set with multiple reports? So like you have your proper data model, and then you just build every report off of that, is what it sounds like to me.
Yep, so you could certainly do that. You deploy your data sets to a workspace, and a workspace is where your department or your team is collaborates, and you can have a single data set up there. That's actually a common best practice, to have a single centralized data model, what is commonly referred to as a semantic model, where you can rely all your reports on. You may have different subject areas for different models, of course, but a common practice I see is having a single data set with that team's data, and they can all report off that single version of the truth, or that single centralized model. With that being said, they've also, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this feature is still in preview. But they also have cross workspace data sets. So if you have a data set that is common across multiple workspaces or multiple teams, you can also label that data set for cross workspace support. I believe that is still in preview.
So you would be able to, if you're referencing that data set from a different, if you're referencing a data set from a different, maybe from a different deployment pipeline in a different set of workspaces, you could also you could reference that one from this set of reports in this deployment.
Yeah, that does open up a can of worms for sure.
Yeah, no, it's kind of dangerous, but it's definitely interesting. And then I assume then you'd also be able to do things like drill through to other workspaces.
Sorry, say that again. To drill through.
Oh, well, I'm not sure if you can do that, but yeah, when you right click on a visual and you select drill through, sometimes you can drill through to other reports.
Yeah, you can do that. You have to enable that feature at a specific report level. You have to allow it, but that is possible. But that's not really related to the deployment pipelines per se.
Just something to be careful of, like if you ever do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as mentioned, being in preview and fairly new, I think you can uncover things like this. I mean, one thing Power BI is still looking to solve is the source control of the actual PBIX files as well. So right now, if you go to their white paper, the current best practice is to save up to OneDrive with automatic updates. So I look at the deployment pipelines as kind of a piece of the puzzle that ultimately I think they're getting to. So definitely an exciting feature.
Yeah, and there's definitely a few other things as well, like how they're actually storing the PBIX behind the scenes. So you can, so they can kind of track changes more granularly from a version control perspective. And there's other things you could do too. Casey, were you going to touch on at all? Like, this is a premium only feature, but I mean, some of this stuff you can do, kind of roll your own.
Yeah, so you mean like the creation of the workspaces and stuff?
Yeah, creating workspace and using like the REST API to create scripts to move it from one to another, but it's very manual. Like, I mean, I don't want to say it's manual. It's labor intensive to create those pipelines manually and time into, Azure DevOps. But it is something that you can achieve without premium. Obviously Microsoft rolls it out as a premium feature first, and then there's enough interest and demand, then some of the features start to become available for non-premium workloads too.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit to that, and let me create a new pipeline to help kind of facilitate that a little bit. So here I created a new pug pipeline. You can see I have a whole bunch of getting a little bit of an echo. So here you can see I have a whole bunch of empty pillars, and that's because I have no workspace assigned to these pillars. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this assign workspace, and you could actually select a workspace that is currently not in a deployment pipeline. So I'll do sample workspace, this is development, and I'll assign this. And here are those empty stages I was referring to. So, and as Jared was referring to, the nice thing about these deployment pipelines is simply by clicking deploy to test, it will create a new workspace as well as public or replicate the data set and the reports in that workspace. So currently, I don't have any workspace associated with this. If I go to my workspaces, I have sample workspace, but I have no production and test. So when I click deploy to test, it will create all of this content. So what Jared was referring to when rolling your own, you could certainly kind of put this in place either manually through the creation of 2 separate workspaces or 3 separate workspaces simply by using the create a workspace feature. You could also automate this with REST APIs. So you can do things that will automatically create workspaces for you as well as create that content as well. It's probably what this is using behind the scenes too. It's probably using the same REST APIs as you would to kind of roll your own pipeline as well.
There's always a way to make it happen. It's just, how much effort it's going to take to do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and one crucial thing I forgot to point out, I mentioned the use of parameters in your model as a best practice. Now, I don't know what this report is. I kind of just took a sample one, but you'll see that you have the ability to create dataset rules to configure exactly the data source that you're pointing at. So your development can point at your development database, your test, and your production, So what you can do is you come in here for dataset rules, and you can leverage parameters to specify what the data source is going to point to. So I don't have that set up, but I did want to point out that this is supported to define these rules that will leverage parameters to point to the proper data set. Lastly, I did want to point out the access. So the access for the pipeline and the workspace are managed separately. So this does get a little confusing. It took me a little while to wrap my head around it. But from the pipeline access, you have one role currently, and that is an admin. And this means that you can simply view the deployment pipeline. You can also manage some of the dataset rules and things like that. But the workspaces are actually what controls if you can deploy to that higher environment. So what I mean by that, within our workspaces, you can see that you can manage the access separately. So if I was to add myself as a viewer to the test environment, I can view that content, but I do not have permission to publish the content to the test environment. And that is because a Power BI workspace viewer, they don't have the ability to publish up to that workspace either. So it kind of has the same sort of idea. So if you go to deploy to that environment and you are not an admin or a member, you will be unable to do so. So there is kind of this, some management that needs to be done on the pipeline and workspace level that I think will be cleaned up a little bit down the line, but wanted to mention that they're managed separately. All right, so that concludes the deployment pipeline presentation. I'm going to bring back up our PowerPoint. And I'm going to hand it off.
Yeah, just go one slide, Casey, if you would. Yeah, you could leave it right there. Okay. Yeah, and sorry to ruin my introduction there, but I'll take it from here. Yeah, so this is Jared, and one of the new features that came out recently, May, I believe, was called featured tables, and it's allowing you to leverage data that you're defining outside of outside of Excel in Excel. I could show some of these features today, but since one of the features requires like being part of an early adopter program, I'm not going to be able to show everything. But it's kind of so compelling. I wanted to at least introduce it, so when it does become available, you'll all have the chance to see it. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so everybody see Excel? Okay. All right. So this does require a certain version of Excel, and I don't have that exact version, so I won't be able to do all the features as I mentioned, but some other versions, there are capabilities that you can see. One of the things that's really interesting is this concept of data types. And this is kind of a poor name because anybody who's relatively familiar with database administration, Power BI in general, data types mean something entirely different. But if we could get beyond that, these data types here allow you to leverage kind of a known published data source to validate, or enrich data that you might have in a spreadsheet. So in this case, let's assume we have a list of geographies. Let's see, we got Caitlin from Boston. We have Glastonbury, of course. Let's see what else we want to put. Springfield, that's a fun one. So I just created a couple different values in this Excel field, and you could already see it's actually prompting me if I want to convert it to a geography. But if I highlight these fields and I click this geography button here, it's going to go ahead and do a lookup, and it puts this little icon next to it to know, so that I know that this is now a geography, and we'll call this location. Okay, so Boston, I'll get a little tooltip here that tells me if I clicked Control Shift F5 is the shortcut key, it brings up some information about Boston. Really, really cool. Glastonbury, same thing. Control Shift F5. Although this is Glastonbury in the UK, so I'm just going to cheat and make that Glastonbury, Connecticut. I mean, you might want to make this Boston, Mass too, but it's gets the idea across. So now we see Glastonbury, Connecticut. Springfield, I have no idea what this one's going to come up with. What did we go with? Massachusetts. So I don't know if it's basing it on geography, but if it wasn't the right one, there are options to replace it with one that would be more appropriate. So when something has an association like that to a data type, you can show the card, which I did by clicking Control Shift F5, which no one's ever going to remember. Or you can come in and say, I want to change this. And maybe I didn't mean Springfield, Mass. I meant Springfield, Illinois. So I can do that and say, okay, that's the one I want to select. And then when I bring up the card again, it should remember that. Okay, so pretty cool. The next thing we might want to do is, well, let's make this a table, so it's a little cleaner. Let me zoom in a little bit. The next thing that we want to do is, all that information was great that showed up in the card, but how cool would it be if I could come to click on this little icon and say, well, what's the population of these locations? And this is just built into Excel. I didn't have to do anything for this. I could grab my lat and long values. Next thing you know, I'm plotting these on a report with this data that I've kind of harvested without much effort. So pretty cool feature. Definitely recommend playing around with it. I'll also show real quick the stock one. So let's see, tickers. I don't need this header, by the way, but it's just nice when you have the table. Let's start with just Microsoft. So if I go back to the data tab and say stocks, it shows a little question mark for a second. And it's trying to take a guess. In this case, it's going to ask me which one I want. So I do that. It knows I mean NASDAQ, I guess. And I can let's go ahead and bring in 52-week high, 52-week low. actually. I mean, and I think you could, well, let me go ahead and make this a table again too. So this is high, this is low. Control T, by the way, is a shortcut for table. You could do it in the menu too, but I like my shortcuts. You could also do things like maybe I want to call this like the range. And I could say, I haven't actually tried this yet, so I don't know why I'm doing it on the fly, but notice I'm saying high minus low, and I've kind of done math here directly in my table. Let's see, any other tickers worth mentioning? Tesla is a good one. Is that the right ticker symbol? I forget what it is. Let's try a different one. Peloton. I bought some of this, and of course now it's gonna not work on me, but. Oh, okay. Yeah, for some reason it didn't add it to the list, but let's try Tesla too. Oh, Tesla picked up fine. So as you can see, you can do some pretty cool things with this. Assuming you're starting with data that maps to one of these two sources, and that's all great. But what if you want to do something other than stocks and geography? So the feature that Microsoft came out with now is called featured table. And what you do is you define that featured table in Power BI. And when you do so, you'll be able to access them here in the exact same way. So just imagine being able to pull up, you pull a list of marketing, signups and you drop them in a spreadsheet, and then you tie those to your customers based on the name, or list of employees and whatnot. And not only is it tying them to those centrally defined IDs, you're able to pull in other information about them. So their address, their whatever, how much revenue you in theory did with them a previous year or something along those lines. So while I cannot, and I have some slides that show what it actually looks like, I cannot get those organizational ones to show up in my list with this version of Excel, unfortunately. I'm going to show you how to set it up in Power BI, and it's really easy.
Jared,
yeah.
Question about that. For the data types, could they be driven off? Could the identity be driven off multiple columns? Like, for example, if it was like the ticker and an end date to a month, would it be able to get you the high and low of that day, something like that? I'm not sure if it can do it with this particular one, but would it potentially be able to be driven off multiple columns?
They're more for entity lookups based on a name and a unique identifier. So it's the entities that you're looking up, but the entity that you're creating could have as many columns as you want on it to do that kind of analysis. To your question, I will address it because actually, let me come back to it because it's a little bit different of a scenario. But okay, so here's a Power BI report for anybody who's attended the dashboard in a day. This might look familiar. You have sales for your own company, Van Arsdale, and you pulled in sales information for some of your competitors, and you have geographies and so we want to have a list of manufacturers, Van Arsdale being one of them. If you look at the data model for this, very, very simple. You have your sales table, products sold by manufacturers, geographies, and dates. So it's this manufacturer table here that we're really interested in. We have a manufacturer ID and a manufacturer name here. And just to show you what the data looks like real quick. So you have your ID and name. Those are the two main fields. I mean, sure, the logo, is something that we saw it could pull in pictures, and there's ways to do that. But let's start with these two scenarios. Kind of anticlimactic knowing that we're not going to have the, voila moment at the end, but maybe next time. Okay, so what we need to do in order to create a featured table is you have to go into the settings initially in Power BI. So File, Options, and Settings. And since it is a preview feature, like brand new preview feature, you have to come in here and turn featured tables on. As you can see, I like to test out all the preview features. So I just almost always turn everything And there's a link here where you could learn a little bit more about the capability. Okay, so since I already have that turned on, I come back to this view here where I have my model and I see my manufacturer table. This is the one that I want to share. So there's this new feature, terrible term, there's this new field over here in the properties that shows up called feature table. Allow people in your org to search for this data, right? And I could say, yes, I would like to make this a feature table. And it says, well, what do you want to call it? We'll say this is dyad manu or MFG test or something like that. What do we want? We have to have a label for the row. What's the name? So in this case, it's just called manufacturer. Sometimes you might have the word name on there. And what's the key? So in this case, it's the manufacturer ID. This is what it needs to uniquely find that record. Well, the name and the ID combination. So if I say, I want to save that, it saves this to my model, and then I would go ahead and hit publish to move this up to the Power BI service, just like any other report. All right, so I have a prepared version of that in the oven here that I can pull out. One thing I should mention first, this feature is enabled in organizations by default, but in case your tenant admin goes in, you notice I'm logged in as not myself here. In case your tenant admin goes in and turn it off, you'd have to come in and convince them to go into tenant settings and turn on allow connection to feature tables, this setting. And also, I believe it's export to Excel. It's one of the two, export to Excel or export data. I forget. One of these two you need to turn on. And that allows people to find it. But then once you publish it to the Power BI workspace, so I have this workspace here called 2020 0326. So this was just a workspace I had, and notice I added a data set and a report here called featured tables. And the one thing you might notice is this endorsement here. In order for something to show up as a featured table, it has to be a shared or a certified data set. And in order to do that, if you click on this little ellipse next to your data set itself, and you go into, oops, I just clicked too quickly, and you go into your settings at the very bottom, and this is, by the way, where you set up any schedule refresh, those parameters Casey was talking about, but at the very bottom, there's this thing called endorsements, and this is where you could set it to promoted, certified, if you have permission, but you need it to be at least promoted for it to show up. And that's it. I mean, other than having the correct version of Excel so that this could have that climactic finale, yeah, that's really all I could show on it, other than kind of drawing your own conclusions based on the other Excel behavior that we saw with the stocks and whatnot. But imagine, having a list of your manufacturers and being able to pull an organizational entity in. James, to your point, if you want to do more kind of ad hoc analysis in Excel, not just a list of entities, relatively, Killian, were you going to show this? Connecting to a Power BI data set from Excel?
I was not.
Okay, I will real quick. All right, so under Get Data, now there's a feature called From a Power BI data set. And since that data set that I published is certified, it shows up right at the top. So I could click on this, and it's not going to pull in all the data. In this case, it's going to give me a pivot table with that live connection to that data set. So if I really wanted to see my list of manufacturers, I could do that, and they show up right here. And not only that, I could pull in, like James, you were asking, I could pull in some calculations. So like if I wanted to see sales and prior year sales, maybe by country as columns, you could do something like that pretty quickly. And this is connected back to that Power BI data set. So just a different way to connect to the Power BI data, which a lot of people love. But the concept of these entities that you could pull in for some of those ad hoc lists are really compelling too. Okay, well, I think that's all I have. But actually, Casey, if you want to present again and share the next couple animations in the slide. It shows what it should look like when you hit this little down arrow. Yeah, there you go. So that's what you should see right there, your manufacturers, products, customers, etc. And the next thing is a video that actually shows kind of what it looks like. So yeah, if you just let it go, it's pretty quick. I mean, it shows the same exact thing, except you're pulling in organizational data as opposed to whatever. So you get the little preview, and then you can pull in additional fields there. All right. So I'm not sure whom I'm handing off to next, but any questions too, I'm happy to try to address them. You just have to trust me.
Jared, there was one question that's a little bit off topic at the moment, and I'm not sure if you guys were going to dive into this later, but it was a little bit about power on. So maybe before James or Killian get introduced, someone had put into the chat something about budgeting. And I don't know if you wanted just features of kind of what the product is, or if maybe you're willing to speak up and take yourself off mute and ask specifics, but I think you're probably the best person to potentially answer.
Well, I don't know, James, it's up to you. Do you want to address the
Yeah, I thought we
budget
could
right
just
back?
save that. I would say we just save that for the end. I mean, we can always go over that kind of stuff at the end of it. So
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I could speak to it, and James is very immersed in the Power On product, so he's the most knowledgeable. But yeah, let's circle back at the end and make sure we get through everything else.
All right, with that being said, our next presenter is going to be James with some Azure Synapse Power BI integration.
alrighty, so this is not so much, I guess, Power BI integration with Synapse, but it is some cool stuff that you can do with Synapse that I see a lot of possibility for Power BI. So I guess I'll give you guys a quick overview of Azure Synapse. Azure Synapse, well, a lot of people know there used to be something called Azure Data Warehouse. Azure Synapse it's now called Azure Synapse Data Warehouse, but Azure Synapse itself has this thing called Azure Synapse Studio that is sort of a conglomeration of all of your general modern data state entities all in one place. And that's sort of what its purpose is here. So now that also means that you can bring in your Power BI reports. So I could actually link in one of my workspaces and make that workspace available in Synapse. I could do reporting off it, stuff, all that right here. I'm not going to go into that too much right now, but what I am going to show is something that sort of struck me as kind of interesting in Azure Synapse Studio. Since it's got all of these individual pieces coming together, it gives you a lot of power to do some of the stuff that you would typically do through like 5 or 6 different tools at once. Like you'd have your Azure Data Factory that brings in data from a data lake to a data warehouse, and there's a lot of different steps. In here, you can do a lot of that just right on the fly in one place. So what we have in here is we have an Azure Data Lake. Takes up. All right. So this is a data lake in the Talon tenant. We've got some test data in here. Got some CSVs, some parquets. We also have in this workspace itself, we've got we've got a Spark instance, so you can do some stuff where you can actually do Spark in here, connect all of your individual data pieces. But you also can have your Azure SQL Data Warehouse now in here as well, and on there you can like perform your typical queries, and then even do some sort of like really on the fly work to get some data in there. And then, of course, you can serve that data up to Power BI reports. So one of the simple things you can do in here on just something I've done before. Whoops, wrong button. If I go in here, I can grab this Parquet file and I can just do a select top 1000. So anyone that knows in Data Lake, you've one of the most effective ways to store data, I should say, is in Parquet files. They're really efficient. They can take advantage of the distributed file systems that the Data Lake has, so you can technically have them across multiple different file systems, and it makes for some pretty efficient querying. But typically with a Parquet file, it's not very human readable. Like if you open a CSV, it's really easy to read. You can even import it into Power BI. For a Parquet file, what you'd always have to do to read the Parquet file is you'd have to have another tool that brings it in and then displays it out, something like Databricks. Now I can just go to that Parquet file through Synapse Studio and right click on it, say select top 100 rows, and I'm running an Azure SQL data warehouse in the background. It has, it's basically a SQL, it provides to me a SQL foundation that can query from this. So you can see here, it just already made me some Polybase SQL that's going to go to that location and read in that Parquet file and select the top 100 rows. So I run that really quick. And here we go. I've got the data coming back from there. So that's one kind of nifty thing. It gives you some like on the fly ad hoc sort of stuff. But the main thing that I thought was really interesting about this was the fact that now one limitation I had with bringing some Power BI data occasionally was I would have it in my data lake and it wasn't really data that belonged in the data warehouse. So we would be sort of at a crossroads of, well, do we want to just make a data warehouse table for it to serve it up? Or do we want to have some sort of temporary holdover solution, or do we want to put it out to a CSV, what have you? And so now you kind of don't have to do a lot of that. Technically, you could do this before, but Azure Synapse Studio makes it very simple. What we can do now is just create an external table, and there's very little configuration that has to get done after we create that external table to just read directly from the Parquet file as the data warehouse and serve that up as a table to Power BI. So I can go in to do that. I'm just going to take another example here. I already have this set up, but I can go to this Parquet file. Oops. Actually, I'll just use this one again. And I can say create external table. I'm going to give that a new table name. And I'm going to tell it to do that in my SQL data warehouse. Open script. And so this has done a lot of like just general creation behind the scenes for me already. Actually, this is almost right. I do have another one that is the one I'm actually going to be using, but shoot, where did it go? Right, so this is, nope, not that one either. Right. Looks like it lost mine, but in any case, so what this is basically doing is it's saying it's going to create some login credentials for me. It's going to create a definition of a table, and anytime I query that table, it's going to actually be querying the Parquet file itself. So when in doing this, it's sort of just a layer on top of which I can now query Parquet files as if I'm querying a database table. And from that, I'll be able to basically bring a Parquet file into Power BI, which is something you couldn't just do out of the box before. So that's basically what I got for you. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. All right, then. I guess I will hand it back to KC.
Yeah, I'll just mention real quick, James, two things, and in case people have questions. You may have saw James was using, one of them was like an on-demand SQL, and then in the second scenario, he picked the database. The new version of Synapse has two modes that you can operate in. One where you spin up your data warehouse and you're using that like you traditionally would. The other is you're using that on-demand compute. So you're getting charged per query you run. So even if you're not using the database, you're not paying for it. The data is sitting in the data lake, and every time you want to run a query using that on-demand compute, it's fractions of the cost. I mean, I wouldn't suggest using it, for millions and millions of operations. In that case, it might make sense to have a data warehouse, but in terms of operating over large sets of data sitting in the data lake, it's incredibly quick.
Great. All right, so our last presenter for the night, we have one question actually before we go on. Do you know if JSON is supported in Studio? Does SQL, I believe you could query JSON, James, Jared? Do you
Yeah, I
know?
think
So Polybase cannot use JSON, as I recall, but Databricks and Spark can. So there's definitely ways to read it. So Azure Data Factory can read it. Spark can read it. I think it's just Polybase can't. It can handle CSVs and Parquet files, maybe ORC or something else, but it's really easy to convert it to Parquet. I mean, honestly, Parquet files, just so you know, if you could think of it like a CSV, but like every single unique value in each column, you compress it down into a separate, separate file kind of, and it's stored each column kind of separately, and then separates it into multiple files that it spreads across the cluster. So it's fast. It's like really incredibly fast running queries. Casey and I did a demo with like hundreds of Parquet files that had like millions of rows. I think it was 1.5 billion rows that we were able to query in under a minute. So it's to get like the full count. So it's incredibly quick.
Yeah, so short and sweet answer your question is yes, you can do it in Synapse Studio, but not through the mechanisms James just showed. You would do it through the big data analytics tools like Spark that are built into Synapse. All right, with that being said, our last presenter is Killian. So Killian, if you want to, I'm not going to bother sharing the presentation again. So if you have that up, do you have that up and ready to go?
Yeah, sure. I could just show the slides.
Yeah. So just to intro Killian while he's getting it up, he's going to be showing the monthly updates over the past 2 months.
Yep. So thanks, Casey. So here we go. If you remember, we only meet every other month, so I'm demoing both the May and the June new features. The June, which they just released recently. So here's the links to both of those. There's a lot of reporting and data prep and connectivity features that were released in both May and June, as well as a lot of third-party visualizations. I won't be going over too many of those because there aren't any stock visualizations that were added. They're mostly third-party, but we will be going over some of the visuals and data prep features. So first off, we have May here. You can read through this if you'd like, but the big ones I'll be talking about is the apply all filters, the drill through button, which I previously demoed, but now it's generally available. Some formatting for the buttons, some page navigation options. I think that's it for May. And then for June, we have a few reporting features. For these, I'll be going over the hierarchical slicer, which I also, if anyone was here in the past, they might remember me going over that. As well as the line chart dot formatting. So without further ado, I'll get to some of the demos. Any questions over these features so far? Or if not, I could just start up. I'll be using the same Power BI presentation that Jared went over a little bit and that many of you have probably seen in the past, with some additions to demo some of these new features. So first off, the apply all filters. This is a feature where instead of the stock functionality, the default functionality where when you click a filter or click on a visual, it automatically filters your data to whatever you clicked or whatever you've selected. This lets you select multiple filters at once and then select one button to apply them all at once. So I'll go ahead and show the options for this. So many of you might not know about this or might not have seen it because it seems like most people use the stock functionality for slicers and for filters. But if you would like to try this out, this is the functionality that already existed. It was to add an apply button to each slicer. So what you would do is you'd click on a filter and you'd press apply, and you'd click another filter, press apply, which got redundant if you had 6 or 7 filters. So now what you can do is select multiple and then have the single apply button at the bottom. And that's the setting that I currently have selected, so I can go ahead and demonstrate that. So I have category and country filters selected. So let's say I want to do mix and Canada, for example. As you can see, nothing on this page has changed yet, and it's waiting on me to select the apply. And then we'll go ahead and filter by both of those. So as you can see here, got Canada selected. Again, this is different than the stock functionality, but this does make it a lot easier if you have multiple filters and you don't want to go through and wait for each one to load between each click. And again, that has to be changed. You have to change that in 2 spots. You have to first select the apply filter, and then you have to select the new apply all button, which is currently a preview feature. So any questions about that? Fairly simple. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off so it doesn't mess with the rest of my demos. I'm also used to using the default functionality, which is the instantly apply the changes. So change that back. All right, so next up is the drill through button, which is now publicly available. Before it was only a preview feature, I believe, when I last demoed it in March. And as well as making it publicly available, they included some more formatting options and some small updates to the button and the working of the button itself. So as you can see now, I have nothing selected, and in order to drill through into something, you have to select first what you want to drill through into. So highlighting it, I'll get a tooltip to drill through to by manufacturer. Select a single data point from country. So the way I have it set up is that it'll drill through to this by manufacturer page through country. So for example, if I select USA here, it now has a green button and says control click to drill through to by manufacturer. So I'll go ahead and do that. And then if you look here, as it loads, it already has United States selected. Going back to the button itself, these tooltips, both of those were actually automatic. I didn't have to put in those, or I didn't have to word those myself, which is pretty nice. It's pretty easy to understand and pretty well made, I would say. And then one thing they added upon making it publicly available is to make it formatted differently based on which state the button is in. So I can go ahead and edit the button to show you. So if you notice, it's this red checkered background when it's disabled. If I try to click it now, nothing will happen. And then, as you saw, it's green when you're able to filter through it. So what you can do now is you can fill the button, you can change the text, you can change the tooltip based on if it's in the default state, hover, on press, or disabled. Right now it's in the disabled state, and that's why I have this red, I actually have this red checkered image fill, which I'll talk about in a second. And then on the default state, which is when it's available to be pressed, it's this green fill. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this drill through button. And then moving right on to another small update they had to buttons in general, not just the drill through button, is you can now have an image fill on all buttons. So I, for example, made this red checkered image just as an example, but this is also useful. I think they talked about it in their demo summary for if you have, say, if you have all your buttons within your company are all formatted or are all designed a certain way. You can just use those images instead of trying to match their formatting through all the visualization customization features. You could just use an image instead and set the text, or just use no text if your image has text, etc. So just a
One
nice
thing
formatting. Yep.
One thing I want to mention too on the drill through button,
Yep.
this is a really great accessibility feature. So if you have, part of your population who, you may not have the motor skills, to kind of right click, move the mouse to a drill through, page, it makes it a little bit easier to navigate. So another area that Microsoft has spent a lot of time investing. As you can see, I mean, that's hard for somebody with great dexterity to kind of navigate in that right click menu without it like disappearing on you. So just one other thing to mention.
Yep. Yeah. Accessibility, then also intuitiveness. Obviously, this is just a button that says drill through. I can make it say to by manufacturer to be even more obvious to the viewer.
Right.
Killian, someone's also asking in the chat, how is this different from the right click drill through? Is it different from right click drill through?
Functionally, no.
Okay.
Yeah, so it just makes it an easier way. I think when they announced this feature, when I first demoed it, they just said it was a highly requested feature through people that are commonly right-clicking to drill through or having to go back and forth. And
Or maybe don't even realize that right click drill through is a thing because it's so hidden, right?
Yeah, so this just makes a pretty important feature that much more apparent and easy to use. So move on to a couple other formatting things they've added in the May update. This is all from May so far. First is this drop shadow, just a simple formatting feature to make visuals more either apparent on the page or just more styled to your liking. See here, I can go to formatting and show it's under shadow. I have a red shadow on this market share visual right here. Pretty simple, pretty easy to use, but something they have added. Yeah.
Were you going to cover the function thing next to it? It's kind of a cool feature. Making it red kind of made me think of it.
I was not.
So what that function does lets you set that color based on a formula. So you could kind of define rules, and that way, I was just thinking if you had like low market share, you might make it red, or great market share, maybe green or blue. But yeah, that's kind of a powerful addition.
Maybe highlight some KPIs on a page.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit more subtly, perhaps. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, there's another feature with it. It's visual but also functional. Moving on to they've added to the line chart some more, I would say, visual additions. You can go to now what you can do is, if say you want to highlight a single point. I only have 4 points on this chart right now, but say you want to highlight a certain one, say if you had many, or if you just want to make it stick out to the user, you can format it. You can make that point stick out by formatting data colors, and then you can select which point you want to show off. So say I selected rural, I can highlight this point. And here we go. So say the whole point of having the line chart is to display where rural is, for example. It's just an easy way to display that. And then you can make every point on there color as well. So you, I don't know, want to display something about every single data point you have, or multiple, or a subset, or whatever it may be. Just a neat little formatting option there.
That is nice, because there's been a couple scenarios where customers have asked, like they want to highlight a specific point in time, where like they want to tell a story, right, and show when something occurred. So being able to do that, and then you could have text somewhere else that kind of relates to it. It's pretty cool.
Right. Points in time might be even more powerful in this case than just data points, but yeah, certainly useful. They had a couple of good demos about this. Move back to the market share slide here. I can show the hierarchy slicer, which if anyone has been to a couple of these pugs in the past, they might remember I also demoed that before it was publicly available. So This is now publicly available, as well as they've added some features to the formatting and to the convenience of the slicer itself. So this is the hierarchy slicer right here. If anyone's used a slicer without these expanded, this is a general slicer format. And then in order to make it a hierarchy slicer, what they call it is you just drag more fields onto this slicer. So if you see over on the right here, I'm using category and segment. And furthermore, I'm using the product hierarchy that already exists. All I have to do is drag that onto this slicer, and it automatically made it a hierarchy slicer. And then in order to use it, you can expand these fields. You can select a whole one just like a normal slicer, or you can deselect or select however you'd like, or multi-select by holding control. And then so yeah, that is the format and the functionality that I demoed in the past. But a couple of the additions is now there's new options. So instead of having these plus and minuses, you can make them carets, you can make them chevrons. The icons now scale. You can customize the indentation. So say you don't want these indented as much, or say you have 7 or 8 levels, you don't want them indenting this much for each level. And then it's also supported with AI visuals. So that would be a bigger one, but mostly formatting options for general use of this slicer. So any questions or comments about that? Before I move on to the final option or final feature that I'm talking about, which I'm actually unable to demo, but is page refresh and change detection. So I can talk about those a little bit. I haven't used either one too much, so if anyone wants to chime in, but page refresh is a way to, so when your Power BI, when you're connecting to direct query, instead of through a static data set like this one is, page refresh will allow it to refresh on an interval, depending on a time input of when you want to refresh the data. So say, I don't know, you're getting new sales every day or every month, and you want to keep your visuals updated rather than having to manually do that. You can set it to 1 day, you can set it to an hour, and I believe different intervals depending on if you have pro or premium. But then furthermore, change detection is a sort of custom sort of page refresh. So you can go in and you can add you can look at a certain field, or you can look at you can add like a function that you want to check in order to refresh the page. So instead of just saying refresh every, I don't know, 5 hours, you can say refresh when this field changes to this value, or this value changes to this amount. So say you have a sum of products and you only want to refresh your visuals when a new product gets added or deleted, you can add the change detection feature or the change detection function to that field rather than detecting only on a time-based situation. So this is now generally available. Page refresh is available to Pro and Premium with different time limits for each. Pro is 30 minutes and Premium is 5 minutes, which could be changed by admins down to 1 second. Then change detection, they now have simulation in desktop, and you can also preview how visuals react to the changes. And then change detection, you can also check your queries and performance analyzer to see how that's affecting your performance. And again, I'm sorry that I can't demo any of this since I'm not using a direct query, but that's just a little bit of an overview.
So in case people don't know what direct query is, just to kind of reiterate what Killian's saying, is like when you go through the dashboard and day training, for instance, we pull data in from CSV files and Excel files, things that are kind of static. And Power BI can, refresh periodically to grab the latest version of those files, but it's, it's a bit heavier of a process to pull those in depending on the file size. Direct query, on the other hand, is you connect to a database, but you don't pull the data in. You just kind of see what the data model looks like, and then every time you want to show a visual on a page, it goes and gets just the data it needs to create that visual, and it does that every time you interact with the page. Every slicer filter, it goes and gets updated really small amounts of data to just create each visual. So yeah, so this just lets you kind of have a dashboard sitting up there on like the factory floor, or in the the executive room, when you're kind of rolling out a new like product, and you're want to keep a pulse on like near real-time sales. And it could just sit there and refresh over and over again without somebody having to sit there and hit the refresh button. There's like other tools like Chrome extensions that used to do it, so this is just a bit more built in. Killian, could you show real quick how to import a visual from the marketplace? It's and just point out the play axis one, the little yellow circle in the visualization area there. Yeah, so this is a custom visual. Someone had a question with what that visual was. So it's a play axis slicer, and yeah, go ahead and just hit play. It's not gonna, you got a couple of other filters on, so it's not gonna be too exciting, but you'll see that just kind of iterates through the months or days, depending on what level you're looking at, and it would update everything on the page accordingly. So that's kind of the idea of how that one works. Yeah, and maybe just click on that ellipse right above your mouse there over in the visualizations and say, get more. It's called get more visuals now. It used to be like import from the marketplace, but there's like hundreds of visuals out there that you can pull in. And that one you can find pretty quickly, called play axis. But all right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. That's pretty much it for me. If anyone wants to talk about any more of those features in detail, otherwise that's it for me.
I have a couple I could actually share. I was setting up in the background, so I'm gonna share and just show some other exciting ones if you don't mind. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep.
All right, so I do not know the month this came out, but if you have a premium capacity within your query editor, you now have the ability to leverage some AI services within Azure directly in your data model. So I went ahead and just created this table, just a user and a comment. So I have a whole bunch of names here, and then just a comment. Service was good, service was bad, it was nice, meh, super duper, and all right. And what I can do is within my query editor, so this is where you do your data modeling within Power BI Desktop, I have the ability to enrich my data with some Azure services. So I'm going to choose Text Analytics and highlight my comments column. And what this will do, it'll have me sign in, if I'm not already, to an account with a premium capacity. And it will have some Azure services available for me to run some functions over my data set. So what I'm going to run is I'm going to run a score sentiment algorithm. I'm going to pick the column or select the column I want it to run this algorithm on. So I'm going to run this on the comment column. I'm going to press OK. And this took a little bit of time, but it's basically going to run the Azure service against this column and enrich my data set with a sentiment. So here you can see the closer the sentiment is to 1, the more positive it is, and the closer it is to 0, it is negative. So service was good. This is obviously very close to a 1. Service was bad. It's very close to a 0. And then you have some things in between where this comment is all right, and it enriched it with a 0.85. So pretty cool. They have the text analytics. They also have vision. So if you look at the demo for the month feature, again, this is either in May or June, I forget which. But the vision can do some pretty cool things by looking at a image and actually determining what that image is. So just to show you some of the options there, I won't be able to run this, but to show you the options you have with the vision services. They have so it's only one, the tag images, so you can relate this to an image, and it will be able to leverage the service algorithm to determine what sort of image this is, or what it comes up with. So pretty cool feature to enrich your data with some AI insights.
And if you don't have premium, obviously premium makes it like one click easy there. if you don't have premium, there's ways to do it. I mean, I have some examples that we've kind of done it in the past, calling the cognitive services directly. So, don't ever let, not having premium, discourage you. I mean, premium is great. Don't get me wrong. It makes things so much easier, but in a couple cases, but there's usually a way to achieve what you want some other way too.
Yeah, and then one more thing I'm going to do on the fly. I actually haven't done this yet, but just to go over some of the connection types, we kind of went over a few of them already. You have 3 primary connection types when you're getting data for your Power BI data models. You have import mode, where you're actually bringing the data into the Power BI desktop file and into the memory within your machine. You have direct query, which is every time you click, you're not actually bringing the data into the model, you're querying the data source. So there's only a number of data sources that support this connection type. And every time you click on a visual, you're effectively writing a query that will be generated and then run against your backend data source. And then the last is live connection. So this is a connection type specific towards Azure Analysis Services as well as Power BI data sets. It's very similar to direct query in the fact that each query is creating a query, or sorry, each selection is creating a query that will be run against your data source. But with live connection, the data sources behind the scenes are made for, or the performance around them is you get performance out of them because the backend data source is designed for these sorts of aggregations and cached queries. So previously, with a live connection, you only got the report canvas view. So I had some, people that I've worked with that were upset about this because you're unable to see the modeling tab. And ideally, if you're connecting to a Power BI data set or an analysis services semantic model, the model should be created in a fashion where you don't need to see the relationships; they're kind of inferred. From a good design model should be able, you should be able to report on that with ease. So you have geography and sales. If you put those together, it's going to aggregate as you would expect. But there's some people that just want that insight on the model to actually see the relationships that are made. So currently with in preview is the support of that modeling or the modeling tab with a live connection. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to connect to a Power BI data set. I'll just click on here. And again, I have not tried this yet, so let's just cross our fingers. Yep, and there we go. We have the modeling tab with our relationships. So previously, I think this is June. So if you have a version earlier than June, then you will not see this tab when connecting with live connection. So this is, again, just a great feature where you can't make any model changes, but at the very least, if you're authoring a report, you could come in here and view your relationships behind the tabular model. All right. So that is all we had for presentations today. Again, just as a reminder, we meet every other month. Still looking for some volunteers for some of the roles we have available for content producers, developers, and presenters. Here's a list of possible topics. I think we've already covered a good portion of these in previous sessions, but again, we love seeing new members, and if any of these topics appeal to you, just reach out to myself or the Power BI user group forum to suggest some ideas, or once again, even if you have a topic that you would like to present, let us know. So here's a few. Go ahead.
Yeah, or questions too. We're happy to field any specific scenarios. And don't forget, Casey, before people start dropping off too, we wanted to address that Power On topic too.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, maybe have we had a session with Power On? Or
it was a long time ago.
They sponsored one. Okay. Yeah. So before I end this, sorry about that. James, Jared, if you have a few words on the Power On product. I can maybe bring up their site for some backdrop.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll say the question was specifically asking if it can be used, if it's like for budgeting. That's definitely one of the scenarios I'm using for. What you can basically do with Power On is it gives you the ability to what'll happen is you can create your visualization, you can use their visualizations, and when you change a value in their visualizations, it creates a query that writes back to the database that you're using based on the context of your filters. So they have a visual called the table matrix, or the Power On matrix, where based on the exact location in the matrix that you are, you can make a change, and that change can be distributed across everything within that cell. So if you have for example, in a budgeting scenario, if you have a product as your rows and months as your columns, and you edit one cell, it'll edit for that product every day of the month. It will equally distribute that change that you make to that cell across those values. Then the other thing that you get the ability to do is you can just write new records to the database, and based on the way that you set up your database and some of the tricks that you can do, you can actually create a new version of your data. You can take the data that you have, create a new version. It creates a copy of that data, and then when you select that new version of your data called a budget version, you can make changes to that budget version and then compare them to the old actuals, or even make additional ones. So that's just
So as a follow-up, we can send out a link for people to grab a demo too of like, I think there might be a self-paced demo. I mean, there's a video that we could share as well, but it really is a powerful tool. I mean, as you know, Power BI is strictly read. There's Power Apps, which are part of the Power Platform, that allows you to write custom applications to write back. The difference with the Power On product is it's kind of purpose built for specific functions. One of them being that visual planner where you're writing those budgeting numbers back to do kind of like forecast scenarios. So it's kind of purpose built for that type of scenario. And there's a couple others too, other products that they have too, but we can certainly follow up with a link to that.
Awesome. Yeah, so we could follow up with some of those links. Again, possible topics, Power On. We've had a group to discuss that, but if there's enough interest, we're happy to maybe dive into another demo. Yeah, if anything interests you, please let us know. And yeah, that is all we had planned for the user group. If there's any questions, feel free